You do basic maneuvering on a large boat. We've already cleared the dock. We'll absolutely be doing another video on how to both launch and recover from the dock. But what we're doing today is we're going to be showing you how to maneuver a large boat and how easy they are to do. At low speeds, there's very little effort and capability from the rudder and the steering wheel, right? So the steering wheel controls two rudders. They're behind each propeller underneath the boat. What we're doing is we're making sure the rudder is amidships. There's a rudder indicator over here on the autopilot. That tells us that the rudder is amidships, meaning it's not going to affect our thrust. As long as you have two engines, big boats are literally like just driving a skid steer, right? So on the left side here, or the port side of the boat, we have our shifters. This is an older boat, no electronic shifters or pneumatic shifters, so there's manual cables that go to the transmissions to put them in forward and reverse. When we say shift, there's no transmission, there's no speeds, there's no gears, it's just forward and backwards. On the starboard side of the boat, we have throttles, which control the engine speed or the screw speed. You can see I'm not really looking at the camera because I'm keeping my head on a swivel looking for other boats. It's pretty calm out here in the bayou today, but the first thing to do is, obviously, depending on what you're doing, most people park their boats backwards, but so you're going to come out of your slip and you're going to do that, and we'll show you that. We actually nose in based on our pilings and the width between those, but to go straight forward in a large boat, you take both shifters and you leave both engines at idle. You want to always be at idle when you shift these things, and you push them forward. And what you're going to see is the boat is going to move forward, and very slowly we're going, right? So you see us moving forward towards our docks. Okay, so say we don't want to go to those docks. We're going to come back to neutral. The boat isn't going to stop completely, right? Because here we're moving about 30,000 pounds, but you just go both aft in reverse. The boat's slowly going to slow down. If you needed to stop faster, we would add a little throttle to both engines, and then we start going backwards. So here we go. We're backing down is what that's called. Now we're going backwards. We're continuing to keep our head on a swivel. And so now say we're in a tight maneuver space and we need to turn the boat left, but not very quickly, and we're not worried about rotating around the center. All we do is if we want to go left, we put the starboard engine in forward and add a little throttle. And now you can see the boat is turning left and going forwards, right? So if we want to turn a little more sharply, we can take the port engine and put it in reverse. Again, very much like a skid steer. And now you're seeing this big boat turn around in a circle that the kids like to call it a donut. But you can see we're actually more maneuverable than a small boat with these offset wide screws. All right, so now we're spinning around in a circle. If we want to move the boat the other way, very much like a skid steer, we're going to put the port engine in forward and the starboard engine in reverse. And we're going to do the same thing. Now, propellers aren't as efficient in reverse, so oftentimes, as you can see here, you're going to put in more reverse than starboard to stay in one spot, and you can maneuver that and control it, right? So here we are again, spinning around our axis, keeping an eye on this pontoon boat, because oftentimes they're renters and they don't know what they're doing, and they're probably trying to figure out while we're spinning in a circle. So we'll do a complete circle. We have that pontoon boat moving off. No problem. Okay, so now we're back in neutral. Big boats continue to go in the direction, right? It's just physics, and object in motion stays in motion, but obviously we have wind and current. The higher your boat, the more wind it's going to catch. The lower your boat, the less wind it's going to catch. As you can see here, we're in neutral. We're not applying any power to the boat now, and we're drifting a little bit to the port. If you can see a flag, the winds are out of the south or on this side, and they're pushing us around a bit. That also can affect which direction you're going. And what I'm doing here is keeping the rudder amidships, because when you do apply differential thrust, it'll move those rudders around a little bit. All right, so now to get going and actually get on our way, so we showed how you can spin around in a very tight circle. We showed how you can go forward and backwards, but we can show how you can also turn the boat with going in reverse. So if you're trying to back up into a spot, so if we put the starboard in reverse, what that's going to do is it's going to drag the nose to starboard while going away from something, right? So if we don't want to actually just stay in a single spot, we want to move back but also turn the bow, we just put one shifter in one direction, right? And the same goes for forward. Again, I showed you going forward to the port earlier, so we're going to go forward to the starboard now. So if you want to stay in one spot, differential thrust, if you have to turn around very quickly. If you're just trying to maneuver the bow or the stern into a direction, and it's okay if you move towards your direction, you just put a single one in reverse. All right, so again, very simple, very maneuverable in these big boats. Everybody's like, oh, it's very difficult. Arguably, if you put me in a small outboard boat with a single engine, I wouldn't know how to drive it, because they're always using vectored thrust, right? Because they're like a jet ski in the sense that their propeller can turn and move things. So they go one way and then aft and then another way and then forward. I think larger boats are far more simple. Again, they're just like a skid steer tractor or a bulldozer, where you can just apply differential thrust. So we're going to get the boat going here. We're going to be cognizant of our neighbors. So we're going to come forward at a very low RPM, almost idle. I do have mechanical diesels, so you do have to adjust them. In this case, we're headed right towards a derelict boat. It's a Florida thing. We're going to want to go to port. So at this point, you can leave them both in forward and still maneuver the boat to a different direction by just adding a little bit more throttle. To go to port, we add more starboard throttle in forward, and then in reverse, it's the exact opposite, obviously. But so now, because our rudders are so small on this boat, as you'll see, I'm going to demonstrate how ineffective the rudders are. They're meant to be used under thrust. When we're doing low speed maneuvering, like we're around here, marinas and bayous and other boats, watch this. I turn this wheel and hardly anything happens. It's a very lagging turn. Like you saw when I used the throttles earlier, it was a much more rapid turn. So when you're at low speeds like this, it's often more times easier to just use differential thrust, and you get used to it very, very quickly. And you see I have granular control. So you saw how long it took me to turn the wheel and get the boat to do something. Now I'm just going to add some throttle, and you'll see how fast it moves. So I'm going to put port throttle in, and we're going to turn to starboard. And you see how fast the boat reacts by just changing that thrust on the bottom. Same to starboard throttle to port. And then you just adjust for winds and currents. So that's something you should keep in mind, especially if you're not on a lake. Obviously, winds are the same problem on a lake as they are here. But as we get tides moving in and out in these bayous, they can push you around a lot. Sometimes you'll have winds coming against you, and you'll be like, why is my boat turning into the wind? That's because a current or a tide is much stronger than wind. So in this case, it's really flat today. You can see there's barely any ripples in the water. If you look out in the distance, it gets a little more rough, but not that much. So we're nice and calm here. We're going to continue by this marina. We try to keep the waves down to nothing. We have 2 marinas in the area, and we have 2 boat ramps. And so obviously you don't want to send large waves. Big boats make big waves. We put out a 3.5 to 4 foot wave when we're up on plane. If we're in between being on plane, so at whole speed versus being on plane when you're really just pushing a lot of water, we probably put out something even bigger and more obnoxious. So we try to be kind as we maneuver here, trying to stay around the 600 to 650 range on the engines. But we are adjusting for some wind here. So the wind is off our starboard bow, and so it's pushing us. So we need a little more port engine than starboard. Again, you can use the autopilot here, but the problem is at this speed, the rudders are not very effective because there's not a lot of flow from the engines going over those rudders. So the autopilot has a hard time holding against the wind, and it continually has to adjust. So as you see here, we have a marina off to our port side. There's a boat ramp over here to our starboard side, again, always being cognizant. Coming up on our starboard bow, we have 2 jet skis. Down here in the Gulf of Mexico, there aren't too many big waves, especially when you're back from a bay to a bayou, right? So we're in a bayou now that leads to Choctawhatchee Bay. Choctawhatchee Bay leads to the Gulf. If you look way off into the distance, you may be able to see Destin. But ultimately, you keep an eye on these jet skis because they will come behind you if you're in a big boat and try to jump your wave. And so that is not, you have to be very cognizant of that, and other boats because we don't react as fast as boats that have outboards or jet skis, and they can tend to do some things that we may not be able to avoid. So you should always be thinking a little bit further ahead. That being said, boats stop very quickly when you remove thrust, and we'll show that as we get up to speed here. So as we maneuver out of the bayou here, we are looking for the channel markers. We are fortunate being in this bayou. It's a commercial, there's two commercial enterprises here. There's an aggregate plant over there to our starboard aft quarter, and right off our port side is a Citgo petroleum terminal, which means that the Corps of Engineers keeps us navigable. So we do have channel markers, which is really nice. Out in the distance, obviously right return, we are leaving the bayou, so we're going to be putting those channel markers off our port side as we maneuver out of here. Right next to the Citgo terminal is one of our boat ramps. And I'm audibilizing everything I'm thinking about here, just so you know what driving a big boat is like. It's not much different than a small boat, but you just have to remember that we don't go as fast. We create a bigger wave, and a lot of boats will get frustrated and try and get around you. Smaller boats create a small enough wave that they will go zipping by here. So looking over the boat ramp off our port side, it is clear. I'm looking over at the boat ramp off our starboard side. It looks clear. Maybe, I'm not sure. Actually, no, there's a boat tied up, so I'm not gonna accelerate. We did warm up the engines. We're gonna do another video for y'all, probably part of the docking, launch, and recovery video, where we show you what it takes to get a big boat ready to push off. It's a little different, mainly because you're starting generators, warming up big diesel engines, and things like that. But it's a little bit different in the launch too, based on how you use lines and how you use other people. If you have a flybridge boat like this, oftentimes it's a little more difficult to launch it yourself. You may need at least one other person, especially if there's some wind. However, I have done a single-handed launch on this boat before. All right, so we're about to clear our boat ramp over here on the starboard side to make sure those people that are parked up against that don't get whacked with our big wave. I've got the green mark over here, and on the other side here in the Gulf, you have to be very cognizant of these markers. Pretty much on the other side of that is 1 foot deep. You do not want to miss the mark anywhere around here in the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty much you don't want to go in any big boat and miss the mark anywhere. There's plenty of channels online dedicated to people running their boats aground. That gets expensive very, very quickly. And so we try to avoid that at all costs, and that we'll do a video on navigation and moving these big boats around and thinking about things that some people might not think of if they're either coming from a smaller boat or, like we advocate, buying your first boat last. Okay, another few seconds and we're going to throttle up here. This is a kind of a present or a treat. Our engine sink is broken on this boat, something we need to repair, so we'll be doing a video on that. So I'll be controlling both throttles manually. Normally, if you were going to get out of low-speed maneuvering, you would go to idle, you would hit the engine sink, and you would use the single throttle or the port throttle to control both engines. I'm going to do it manually. So here in a second, we're clear. We're going to throttle up. The key is you're going to be controlling both the throttles at this point and the steering wheel to keep the boat straight. So here we go. Without further ado, getting on plane. Going to take a look at back, make sure we're not getting any big smoke anywhere. All right, we're up on plane. We're going to drag the throttles back to about 2100. We're pushing the trim tabs down. You can see that here on the port side. Our boat is aft heavy. So as the trim tabs come down, the nose comes down. We accelerate out to our cruise speed, which is about 16 knots. We're going to match the throttle as close as we can because you don't want differential thrust when you're underway. All right, we're about 2080 to just below 80%, which is what our recreational engines are rated on. And here we go. So now the steering wheel works just fine. Even a big boat moves right and left pretty good. So now we can maneuver the boat. It reacts very quickly. As I mentioned earlier, they come off plane very quickly. So if we needed to stop in a hurry, We just went from 15 knots down to almost nothing. So there you go. That is bringing a boat out of a low speed maneuver area, coming up on plane, using the trim tabs to get the boat on plane. And then you can even see somebody passing us there, which is pretty typical for a large boat. So that is the long and short of the initial video on how to drive a large boat. We'll continue this series and show you how easy it is. If you want to buy your first boat last, it's really easy to do this and not very difficult to drive these big boats. So I appreciate y'all tuning in. If that was helpful, hit like, subscribe, and smash the bell. And then we'll make sure we release this entire series in order so you can watch it immediately if you want to see it. The next video will be anchoring. The video after that will be docking and launching. So docking and so launch and recovery. Thank you.